Well, Bill, our last podcast for 2024.
Yes, and it's been a great year for our podcast, Mark. And we're sitting here in my lounge room today, as a matter of fact, and it's a little bit cooler than the 41 degrees we had, when was that? 2 days ago.
2 days ago. But it's still sunny and we're upright and it's good to be alive.
That's right. And for the last podcast, we thought you and I would just have a chat. We'd talk about the year that's been, and we'll highlight 3 or 4 of the key interviews we did, and there's a little bit of a twist in that we've got to do. But just also talking about, I don't want to talk about politics, but it is interesting that things are heating up around the nation politically. But I guess the biggest thing I've taken out of the last couple of days is a report from ASIC that talks about the state of the economy and about the number of insolvencies that they've reported in recent times. And it is quite staggering, and it just reflects what you and I see.
Yep, it's things are tough.
That's right.
But on the other hand, I'm still a believer that the media likes a bad story because it sells newspapers and it sells TV, and the constant opening of the cost of living crisis, I think, just creates more anxiety and angst in people rather than dealing just in the facts. So it's that emotive slant on things doesn't help matters.
Well, it's interesting with our podcasts for this year, and we've put one up nearly every Friday. I think we've probably put up about 48 podcasts this year, roughly, around that mark.
Yep.
And we've only had positive stories.
True.
Which is really good.
Yeah, in fact, that's very true. We haven't had anybody moan and groan when we've talked about their business. But anyway, maybe we only mix with the elite in the business world.
Well,
Bill?
Yeah, and the question I've got for you, Mark, is what are the lessons that you've, taken on board or learnt from our sessions this year? And is there anything that stands out?
Well, funnily enough, both you and I sat here just sort of thinking through what we were going to say. And I said to you, Bill, be brave. And you held up your piece of paper and you too had written be brave, which came out of Shannon Gove.
It did,
from Rostify. And it's interesting because we've actually heard that a few times over the years from the people we've interviewed, and especially this year, where they've been brave. They've had a go. They've taken a plunge and said, this is what I'm going to do. They found, as you say, their tipping point.
Yep.
And they've gone on. Even the last interview we did last Friday, or the last podcast that went up last Friday, Michelle worked for as an accountant in one of the big 4, and then decided, no, I want to do something different. And they bought a property and ended up doing Harvest Experience, totally different to anything she'd ever done before, and has made a go of a good little business by being brave.
That's right, Mark. And the list that I wrote out this morning before we got together on this one is, and I had Michelle down there, and I put a key word, but next to each name that I wrote down, and next to Michelle I wrote corporate escapee, right, which is a great story about breaking away from a corporate life.
Yep. And
under Shannon Kennedy, who we'll talk about, that was a lesson in succession, where a successful family business, the boy's father had realised that he needed to pass it on, and that's a great lesson in succession because so many get it wrong. And also we spoke to David Cornish out at Marcus Oldham, and the discussion there, and I subsequently went back there and spoke to the students, but that was also a bit about succession, but how to have conversations with your parents if you're in a family business and on a family farm. Shannon Gove, we spoke about with Rostify. You'll always hear us talk about tipping points. Well, he had a great tipping point, how he got into his business. And Shannon Bowman was another one who was another award winner, and just about all of these people are award winners in the Geelong Business
Excellence Awards.
That's
correct.
Right. And Shannon was a story about someone that lived an experience and turned it into a business.
So all of them have been brave, to quote Shannon, in a different way each time.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And it was interesting when you talk about the Kennedy Group. a great learning for other family businesses in the way they've transitioned from one generation to the next, and the company's kept growing. It's just fantastic the way they've done it.
And the other thing, they were a successful plumbing business, and given events in, I guess, environmental issues and going forward into the future, they've actually built the environmental side of their business, and they're now a leading provider in removing asbestos. So they've been able to take a traditional business and find another pathway for it.
The other thing that struck me, Bill, is the number of people that have totally changed direction. So John Sear, who does Safe Mate Anti-Slip, I think he was a lawyer.
That's right, for many years.
For many years, in a good law firm, and then he stepped out of that law firm and picked up a family business that was ticking along, and off he went.
Well, it was actually his father's business, and he took that over and has really had a new lease of life, and is really enjoying the fact. And as he said in his interview, he knew nothing about selling, and now he's in a business where he's got to sell like hell.
But and the other one that was impressive as well was Elizabeth Bell.
Yes.
So Elizabeth was on holiday somewhere in Vietnam, sat down and did a little pottery class. Japan. Did a little pottery class. Thought, I love this. And here she is today running classes, packed out classes, running her own business, selling ceramics and running markets, and unbelievable. Yeah. And all started in a little trip while she was on a honeymoon, I think, and then ended up starting to work in her own apartment, and now has her own studio.
Yeah, she told the story of how she's walking through a village in somewhere in, it's not the outback of Japan, is it?
No, in the countryside.
In the countryside, and saw a potter at work, and just wandered in and was able to communicate, and ended up having a couple of lessons from that person.
So again, I use those brave, copyright Shannon, being brave, because she took a plunge and doesn't look back. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the other, we spoke, you and I just spoke about Amir Khatub. Now, what a story that is. Somebody from a tiny little village in northern India going to a local school, somehow ending up in Australia, ending up at Deakin University, coming out of Deakin, and unable to get a job. So to do clean cars and pack groceries, and
I think he was a cleaner at Avalon Airport at one stage too.
He was too, yes. And now he's Amir is what I consider, and I know you think the same, is the AI expert, the best person we've known and met in that area.
And one of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure to know.
That's right. So there are stories, if you go back and listen to the podcast, although we ask the same questions to start off with of everybody, then we branch out and then we find out what the real story is. And as my favourite saying, everyone's got a story.
Everyone's got a story. And every one of those podcasts have got a story.
Well, that's right. Another one we interviewed this year was Shannon Bowman, another winner in the Geelong Business Awards. Shannon had a very difficult childhood where he was ill and spent many months or maybe years in hospital. Came out with a disability. Will admit to us that he suffers from ADHD and he's bipolar, and he's now running a clinic where they counsel people with in trauma and post-stress issues from car accidents and all those types of mental health issues. And that's the reason he won the award, because he's using his lived experience to help other people in a very well-needed environment. And
it's interesting. That's 3 Shannons that we interviewed in the space of 10 days, and I don't think I've met any Shannon ever before.
Obviously born in the same year.
All born roughly the same time.
And we did ask ourselves who was Shannon in those days, why their parents named them, who their parents named them after. That's right. So, Mark, I guess if I look back on what are the lessons I learnt, and yes, I will refer back to your comment about be brave, because every one of them took a risk.
They all took risks.
That's right. And persistence is another issue.
And calculated risks. They didn't just shut their eyes and jump.
Oh, that's right, yes. And in a lot of occasions, lived experience. And when we look back about who's been the most popular podcast or who's had the most downloads, Mark? What name came up?
Well, John Fitzgerald name pops up, and John has had a really interesting career. And if anyone's watching Prop by the Bar, it's one of John's ideas that he produces for Michael DeStefano at Gartland and Gareth Kent. And John's had the most downloads, but I think he's probably the most connected person I've ever met, so that's probably why.
That's right. You mentioned Gareth Kent. Well, there's a personality. Gareth had a large number of downloads as well.
He did too, and he'd probably get even more now if we tagged him on the petition he's running on Market Square.
Well, yes, he's running a petition to do something about the Market Square in Geelong, which has become a hot topic on the basis that it's nearly fully the tenants are all leaving at a fast rate, and it's in a prime position in smack bang in the middle of Geelong.
And you've got to love his passion.
Yeah, that's right.
His heart's in the right place and he wants to see something happen.
Yeah. The other interesting one, Mark, there was our friend at the Arborist.
Yep.
Right. And what a story that was.
And it's interesting because, again, that was a sort of a turning point. Never worked in hospitality, driving past, saw a building, wandered in and started their first cafe.
Came from the fashion industry.
Yep.
And, a lot of experience in the fashion industry and now running one of the best restaurants in Geelong, and her husband's running the bar next door.
Yep. And that podcast goes up this Friday. So by the time people hear this, they will have heard that.
Excellent. So, Mark, I know you've also had a bit of success this year and you've had a recent appointment on a board.
Yep, very, very pleased to be appointed Deputy Chair at the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Authority, something that I've followed for years, and I've been involved in the coast, as you know, with Barwon Coast and the Western Coastal Board, so really excited, looking forward to it.
And just quickly, that is the management group, I guess, or the board to manage from where to where?
Basically starts at Torquay and goes all the way down to Warrnambool.
And you said that, and they manage everything from coastal tourist spots and caravan parks and the whole coastline.
Yep, the whole coastline. And for the first time in a couple of years, I'm now quite interested in bushfire season, because that's going to impact on the Great Ocean Road if the heat goes the way it is, and that's part of what we've got to look after too. So the best thing, Bill, is I think you and I have both learnt from all these people that we've met. We've made some wonderful connections. We've heard some interesting stories, and I think, as you touched on earlier, all of them have been positive. I don't think there's one that we've touched on that we've gone, oh, that's a tough gig.
That's right, Mark, and I've been asked recently, or a number of occasions, well, first of all, why are you doing it? Well, it's pretty obvious when we've just explained that. But it's amazing how many people say, you're making any money out of it. Well, in fact, that's not our motive. Our motive was to be able to tell stories and to interview people we've never met, most of whom we've never met. And now, I guess, what have we got out of it for 2024? It's convinced us that now that in 2025, we're launching a new mentoring company.
Yep.
And that's you and I under the guise of smeadvisory.com.au. And we are taking our own life experiences and our own business experience, combining that with all the lessons we've learnt from our 110 plus podcast interviews, and we know that we can add value to business owners through this new mentoring issue.
Yep.
And we'll talk about that in the future.
Yep. And what do you think's ahead? So we've got a new council in Geelong that's been appointed.
Yes.
So they've got a few challenges ahead of them, so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves and changes.
Yeah, well, the issue is that the state that we live in, and I guess, and probably most of Australia, is the economic times are not good. And next year will be a tipping point, as we say, for many businesses. And everyone's hanging their hat on, well, when will the first interest rate drop come? Well, I'm afraid you can't just sit around and wait. You actually have to plan and just get on with life. But that will be, for me, the key thing in 2025, combined with the federal election, whatever result that brings. But it certainly is interest rates. And I saw a presentation recently where we saw the credit card spending habits from one of the key banks. And people might be shopping as frequently as they have in the past, but they're spending less.
Yep, far less. And traditionally around an election time, things go a bit quieter from a business sense, but I don't know if they could get much quieter. So it'll be interesting to see how the election might stimulate business, and if election cuts happen, and who knows what the result will be like, but there might be a bit of impetus that things sort of stabilise next year and we start to move forward.
And then we've got the elephant in the room, and his name's Donald, and he lives in America.
Yes, that will be interesting. Who knows where that'll head? But I see there's a steady stream of people knocking on his door to discuss tariffs, and heaven forbid he brings tariffs in, because that'll cause all sorts of issues all around the world.
That's right. And look, he's been appointed. He starts in February, I think. And we've just got to sit back and just wait and see.
Take the ride.
But I'm more interested in what happens in Australia, and we'll wait for that federal election and see where that goes, and if that can we can see a revival in the economy, and we need an uplift.
We do.
Yeah. All right.
So, Bill, have a good Christmas.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and you too.
And we've got a long list of people we'll be approaching probably mid-January to get ready for our kick-off of our podcasts in February. And we look forward to doing many more of these.
Yes. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone that's been listening to our podcasts.
And to all those that have contributed by being the guests.
That's exactly right.